One of the most well-known and controversial passages in the Bible is Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18. It is in these verses that we read about the mark of the beast and the number 666. The passage reads, "He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. It is this passage, especially verse 18, that has garnered the most attention throughout history when it comes to prophecy. No verse in Revelation has received more attention than this one with its cryptic reference to the number of the beast, writes scholar Robert Mounce. Other writers have expressed similar conclusions, with Mark Hitchcock saying that the number 666 may be one of the most intriguing issues in all of Bible prophecy. There has probably been more speculation, sensationalism, and silliness about this topic than any other topic in Bible prophecy. Even so, he adds, it is a serious topic that requires and deserves careful investigation. What exactly is the mark of the beast? What is the meaning of the number 666? Are they literal or symbolic? Will people in the future take a tattoo or a computer chip to buy products and services? Does China's social credit system have anything to do with the mark of the beast? This essay seeks to answer these questions. The background of the mark. Let us begin with the biblical, historical, and cultural background of the mark of the beast. Did anything exist in Greco-Roman society that would have been seen by Christians as resembling the mark of the beast? Marks were used in many different contexts in the New Testament world. First, disobedient slaves were branded with a mark, as were soldiers that were defeated in battle. Second, marks appeared within a religious context in Greco-Roman culture. Religious tattoos were widespread as believers were branded to show their devotion. Emperor worship was also popular at this time. Certificates were issued to people who had fulfilled the required rituals of this kind of worship. 3 Maccabees chapter 2 verse 29 teaches that the Greek ruler of Egypt, Ptolemy Philopator, who reigned from 221 to 204 BC, branded Jews with an ivy leaf, which was the mark of Dionysiac worship. Third, the Greek word translated mark was used for the likeness and or name of an emperor on Roman coins and the emperor's seal on business contracts. Mounce says that the Greek word was a technical designation for the seals that were attached to commercial documents and stamped with the name and date of the emperor. It is interesting to note that Ignatius, the bishop of Antioch in the early 2nd century, used a coin metaphor in the same way that John used the mark. Fourth, there is a likely connection to the Jewish custom of wearing phylacteries. These are little leather boxes that contain parts of the Mosaic Law. These were worn on the left hand and on the forehead in obedience to Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 8. You can also see Matthew chapter 23 verse 5. One scholar notes that having a mark on the right hand or on the forehead would have been an obvious travesty of the practice of Orthodox Judaism, which required the faithful to wear phylacteries on the left hand and on the head. Another even calls the mark of the beast a demonic reversal of the Jewish practice. It is likely that John the Apostle, who was Jewish, would have seen the mark as a parody of phylacteries in Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 8. Fifth, there is also the likely comparison between the mark of the beast and the prophet Ezekiel. In Ezekiel chapters 8 through 11, the Lord takes the prophet to Jerusalem in a vision. In chapter 9 verse 4, God commands that a mark be placed on the forehead of the men in Jerusalem who are grieving over the sins of the people. Those who were still following God were to be marked off from those who were sinning. Sixth, Exodus chapter 28 verses 36 to 38 records that a plate with an engraving, "Holy to the Lord," was attached to the priestly turban that was placed on Aaron's forehead. It was to be on Aaron's head so that the Israelites would be acceptable to the Lord. Seventh, and lastly, it is possible that the mark could have also been seen as a parody of the Christian practice of making the sign of the cross on the forehead of a recent convert to the faith. The characteristics and purposes of the mark. Let us now move on to the characteristics and purposes of the mark of the beast. The first thing to note is that Revelation presents Christians as having the name of Christ on their foreheads, as opposed to the unsaved having the name of the beast on theirs. Many scholars believe that the mark of the beast is a parody of the sealing of God's servants in Revelation chapter 7, verses 3 to 8. God seals his followers, as Satan and the beast mark theirs. Second, it is important to emphasize that the mark is given to small and great, rich and poor, and free and slave. According to Mounce, this coupling of opposites is a rhetorical way of stressing the totality of human society. Every person of every status, possessions, and their state in society is included. The Antichrist will use the mark to extend his control over everyone that he possibly can. Third, why is the mark placed on the forehead or the right hand? Scholar William Hendrickson explains it this way. The forehead symbolizes the mind, the thought life, the philosophy of the person. The right hand indicates his deed, action, trade, industry, etc. Therefore, receiving the mark of the beast on the forehead or right hand indicates that the person so characterized belongs to the company of those who persecute the church, and that either preeminently in what he thinks, says, writes, or more emphatically in what he does. This anti-Christian spirit becomes evident. Another scholar, G.K. Beale, believes that the forehead carries the meaning of ideological commitment, and that the hand represents the practical outworking of that commitment. This brings us to the fourth characteristic of the mark. The mark is given to people to indicate ownership. Hendrickson says, this seal, the one on a Christian, indicates that he belongs to Christ, worships him, breathes his spirit, and thinks his thoughts after him. Similarly, the mark of the beast symbolizes that the unbeliever, who persists in his wickedness, belongs to the beast, and therefore to Satan, whom he worships. A mark on a slave meant that he or she belonged to his master. To receive the mark meant that they belonged to that person, worshiped them, or served them. To be identified with someone's name is equivalent to partaking of that person's character. The mark on believers and unbelievers represents that they have been stamped with the character or image of Christ or the beast. If Revelation 13 has the idea of branding slaves in mind with the mark, then the beast worshippers are seen as his property. If branding of soldiers or religious devotees is in view, the worshippers are seen as his faithful followers. It is likely that both are in view. Fifth, the mark will represent the ultimate test of religious loyalty. Only those who would rather die than compromise their faith will resist the mark of the Antichrist. As a result, the mark serves to identify people who will worship the beast. Sixth, the mark allows the followers of the beast to take part in the economy. An economic boycott is raised against all who refuse to fall into line. Its purpose seems to be to harass believers rather than the method by which they are to be put to death. Another writer adds, this economic pressure will be instrumental in causing many weak worldly individuals to succumb to the establishment of the Antichrist. No one will be able to live outside the system because of the economic power of the Antichrist. One will have to worship him or be cut off from the necessities of life. The number of the beast. We now come to the number of the beast. Revelation chapter 13 verse 18 says, this calls for wisdom. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. The verse begins with a call for wisdom. It is likely that this is an allusion to verses found in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Daniel. Referring to the prophecies that Daniel had received, an angel tells Daniel that the wicked will not understand, but that the wise would. In Matthew and Mark, Jesus calls the readers to understand the prophecies of Daniel that are connected to his return. Scholar John Walvoord says concerning the call to wisdom, John is calling for his readers to exercise extreme care and divinely guided wisdom in interpreting the number. It also means that he expected his readers to understand it, pointing further to the solution as centered in 1st century rather than 20th century symbolism. When it comes to the meaning of the number 666, we have had many interpretations throughout Christian history. There are two main methods that are used. The first is known as gematria. The second teaches that 666 carries a symbolic meaning. Hitchcock believes that gematria is the best method for understanding the meaning of 666 due to the word calculate. What is gematria? Put simply, gematria was the practice of representing words and names by the sums of their numerical equivalents. In ancient times, letters of the alphabet served as numbers. The first 9 letters stood for the numbers 1 through 9. The next 9 for the numbers 10 through 90, and so on. As there were not enough letters in the then current Greek alphabet, certain obsolete letters and signs were brought into the system. Thus, every name yielded a number. There are many examples of gematria from the ancient world. One example would be the number 888 found in the Sibylline oracles. Here the number of the name of Jesus is given as 888 in Greek letters. There is also the interesting example of gematria from a piece of graffiti from Pompeii that reads, "I love her whose name is 545. The girl referenced in the graffiti likely knew it was about her. Gematria was used widely in apocalyptic literature because of its enigmatic and symbolic quality. Because of the nature of gematria, it is believed by many that all attempts to identify an individual in the number 666 is difficult because of the metaphorical manner in which language and numbers are used in the apocalypse. Continuing with this idea, Beale says, none of the many proposed solutions using gematria is ultimately satisfactory because there are so many names, ancient and modern, that come to 666. Beale is not kidding. Numerous names, words, and phrases have been calculated to equal 666. Here is an incomplete list. I am not going to sit here and read through every single name or title that has been interpreted as 666 over the past 2,000 years. Nero is the most famous figure in history that has equaled 666 and believed to be the Antichrist. Many different titles of Roman emperors have been interpreted to equal 666. Legends, mathematical formulas, even the Greek word for beast has a numerical value of 666 in Hebrew, according to some. Even the Titans of Greek mythology have been interpreted to equal 666, as have many phrases that are related to God or Satan. However, the most interesting interpretations have come from recent history. The German Kaiser, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Henry Kissinger, Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy, Gorbachev of the Soviet Union, and even Ronald Reagan have been interpreted as being the Antichrist because, according to some, their names equal 666. Hitchcock notes that phone books are full of names that might add up to 666 if converted to their numerical value. It is easy to see that many names, phrases, titles, etc. equal 666. Because of this, Tim LaHaye, the author of Left Behind, says that it is dangerous to make suggestions. The difficulty of gematria has led to a division among scholars on whether or not it is the correct method of calculating the meaning of 666. Beale argues that the large amount of conflicting solutions argues against a literal calculation method as ever yielding the right interpretation. However, LaHaye believes that the number will reveal the name of the Antichrist during the tribulation. The meaning of 666, one man or all of humanity. An alternative way of interpreting 666 teaches that the number is a symbolic way of referring to all of humanity. Thus, 666 does not calculate the name of a future Antichrist. Advocates of this view point out the symbolic nature of numbers in the apocalypse. This view goes back at least to the 2nd century AD with Irenaeus. Although he believed that the number gave us a name of an individual as well, he viewed 666 as a symbol for all the evil of the world before the Great Flood. And he also believed that 666 pointed to the image of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 3. He believed that the image of Nebuchadnezzar was a precursor to the worship of the Antichrist. And Irenaeus also connected 666 to biblical chronology. One can see his connection to the first two by noting that the Great Flood came in Noah's 600th year, and Nebuchadnezzar's image was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Today, many scholars believe 666 is symbolic. This would be especially true concerning the triple sixes. Hendrickson explains it by saying, "Let him remember that the number of the beast is the number of man. Now, man was created on the 6th day. 6, moreover, is not 7 and never reaches 7. It always fails to attain to perfection. That is, it never becomes 7. 6 means missing the mark or failure. 7 means perfection or victory. The number of the beast is 666. That is, failure upon failure upon failure. It is the number of man, for beast glorifies in man and must fail." This is a great summary of the symbolic view, but there are other arguments to support it. First, no other number in Revelation is used in a way to identify a particular individual using gematria. Many numbers in Revelation have some figurative meaning and symbolize some spiritual reality. Why should 666 be any different? Second, there is the fact that the number 666 and the name of the beast are in contrast to the name of the Lord in the very next verse, chapter 14, verse 1. Advocates of the symbolic view do not think that the name of the Lord will be literally visible on a believer's forehead. Instead, the name of the Lord or the beast shows us that they own their respective followers and that the latter has taken on the character of the one who owns them. Third, John uses the word number elsewhere to signify an uncountable multitude, not as a form of gematria. Fourth, the number 7 refers to the idea of completeness throughout the apocalypse, so it is highly suggested that 666 is intended as a contrast with the divine sevens throughout the book and signify incompleteness and imperfection. In addition to this, there is also the number 144,000 in the next verse, which may connote completeness. Beale explains this perspective well. In the Bible, the number 3 signifies completeness, as for example in the completeness of the Godhead in Revelation chapter 1, verses 4 to 5, which is parodied by the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet here in chapter 13, and in chapter 16, verse 13. Therefore, 6 repeated 3 times indicates the completeness of sinful incompleteness found in the beast. The beast epitomizes imperfection while appearing to achieve divine perfection. 3 6s are a parody of the divine trinity of 3 7s. That is, though the beast attempts to mimic God, Christ, and the prophetic spirit of truth, he falls short of succeeding. Seventh, there is also the possibility that the phrase, "for it is a number of a man," should be translated, "for it is a number of humanity." A close parallel to this wording is found in Revelation chapter 21, verse 17, where an angel measures the wall of the New Jerusalem using man's, i.e. humanity's, measurement. The article is missing in both cases, so it is possible that these words may be an idiom to refer to something generic to humanity. This would make 666 a number common to fallen humanity. Fifth, 666 also falls short of 888, the number of Jesus in Greek. Quite simply, the beast falls short of being Christ. Sixth, the number 6 is also seen in the sixth seal, sixth trumpet, and sixth bowl. Each of these depict judgment on the followers of the beast. The seventh in each of these series depict the final consummation of Christ's kingdom. Overall, this perspective argues quite well for a symbolic view of 666, although not every argument is equally as strong as others. I do believe that the number 666 carries a symbolic meaning for humanity. I also agree with the view that 666 falls short of divine perfection concerning the Trinity, the number 7, and 888. It is clearly also a contrast of the Lord's name in chapter 14, verse 1. However, just because 666 refers to all of humanity in completeness does not mean that it cannot also be calculated to give us the name of an individual who will live just before the return of Christ. It should also be noted that just because gematria is not used in other parts of Revelation does not mean that it cannot be so here in chapter 13, verse 18. A word, number in this case, can carry different meanings depending on the immediate context. Final thoughts on 666. Even G.K. Beale, who is a strong advocate of the symbolic view, believes that it is possible that the number could represent both an individual man and be symbolic for fallen humanity at the same time. I agree with this assessment. The argument for the symbolism of numbers in Revelation is strong, and because of the popularity of gematria in the ancient world, it seems clear that the original readers would have immediately recognized that 666 was to be calculated as a name. Since 1 John 2:18 speaks about many antichrists, it is also possible that Nero, Hitler, and others whose names have calculated as 666 may be partial fulfillments of the number of the beast. These individuals are antichrists and are symbols of state power that tries to grasp what belongs to God. G.K. Beale mentions that one individual can be the embodiment of evil at any particular period of history, and Christians need spiritual wisdom to discern the danger posed by such an individual. There is also no reason not to believe that one final individual may be in view as well, aka the final Antichrist. Scholar Grant Osborne responds to the idea that the number only refers to human depravity by saying, the New Testament evidence for an actual Antichrist figure appearing in human history is too strong. Therefore, it refers to a particular person, probably identifying the Antichrist with a certain individual. There is abundant evidence in Scripture that teaches that there will be one final Antichrist before the second coming of Christ. It is likely that no one will be able to know the name of the beast using gematria until the tribulation, so it is a waste of time trying to figure the name out today. Whoever the Antichrist is will fulfill all the prophecies about him. This is why every name in history up to this point whose name calculated to 666 was not the final Antichrist. He must fulfill everything, and no one has at this point. Will people take a literal mark? One of the biggest questions concerning the mark of the beast is whether it will be a literal, visible mark that people will have to take, or if the mark is purely symbolic. Let's first examine the arguments in favor of a symbolic view. The first argument teaches that since the name or seal of God is invisible on Christians, then so will the mark of the beast. This is supported by the fact that the very next verse, chapter 14, verse 1, mentions that the name of God and Christ are written on the foreheads of the saints. Second, the blasphemous names written on the seven heads of the beast in Revelation 13:1 may also indicate that the mark of the name is not visible. The 7 heads of the beast likely represent 7 historical kingdoms. So we must ask, how could 7 kingdoms have literal names written on them? These names figuratively connote false claims to earthly divine kingship according to one author. So the mark of the beast could have a similar meaning. Thirdly, Hendrickson is against the idea that the mark is a single, individual, outward visible sign that will appear on people at one particular moment in history, then and then only. He believes that the beasts in Revelation 13 are symbols for evil government and false religion throughout all of history. Thus, the mark appears whenever evil government and false religions appear, that is, all the time. Beale believes that the mark is clearly figurative of the ways in which the state keeps check on whether people submit to compulsory idol worship. Another scholar, Haley, adds that the mark is figurative as the stamp of paganism impressed upon the character and conduct of idolaters. However, not all scholars agree with this, as many believe that a real visible sign will be present. The main argument in favor of a literal interpretation is, as Mount says it, it is hard, however, to understand how an invisible mark could be used to determine if a person could take part in daily commercial transactions. One can also ask how a symbolic mark can be used as a sign of loyalty and allegiance. If the blasphemous names in the name of God on believers are symbolic, then does this mean that the mark of the beast cannot have a literal fulfillment? No, it does not. Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 17 connects the mark of the beast to economic activity. We do not have this connection for Ezekiel chapter 9 or Revelation 13:1 or 14:1. I agree with Mounts. If the mark carries only a symbolic fulfillment, it is hard to understand how it could be used to control economic activity and as a sign of loyalty. These details seem to teach that a visible mark will exist during the tribulation. There is also no reason why the mark cannot carry both a literal and symbolic meaning. It should also be noted that I disagree with Hendrickson's belief that the beast represents all forms of government throughout history. What could the mark be? If the mark is literal, then what could it be? There are many different examples someone in the modern world could look at. LaHaye brings up food stamps and food rationing that existed in America during World War II. Hitchcock notes other possibilities such as tattoos, ID cards, barcodes, microchips, social security cards, and even retina scanners. Some people bring up China's social credit system or even the name of Allah. David Owen immediately notes that because the mark is placed on the hand or forehead, this would exclude coins. It is also worth noting that the Greek word for mark indicates a stamp and often pointed to an engraved mark or seal impression. When applied to human or animal skin, the mark would be a brand. The Greek epi that is used in Revelation chapter 13, verse 16, means that the mark is to be placed upon, not in. These details would exclude retina scanners. How could this have anything to do with the forehead or hand anyways? And microchips. Ultimately, we do not know exactly how the mark will manifest itself. It is even possible that the mark will be some new technology in the future that we currently do not know about. Hitchcock believes that we should not waste time thinking about this, but he does say, the technology is certainly available today to accomplish the purposes of the mark by regulating world commerce and controlling people's transactions. There are also many amazing new means of locating, identifying, and tracking people's lives that foreshadow the global scenario depicted in Revelation 13. It's one more indicator pointing toward the picture Scripture paints of the end times. Conclusion. The mark of the beast is one of the most mysterious and popular topics in the Bible. As we have seen, there is a good argument to be made that 666 has both a symbolic and literal fulfillment. As to whom the number points to will not be known until the tribulation period. And as to what people will actually take in fulfillment to the mark will also not be known until the time comes. As Christians, we should be very cautious to announce that this or that is the mark, or this person is the Antichrist, until all the prophecies are being fulfilled.